Hello and welcome to the Accountancy Age Big Question. This week we're discussing Barack Obama. Barack Obama's on the front page of Accountancy Age this week, and Gavin Hinks is here with me to discuss exactly why. Gavin, what's Obama got to do with the UK accountancy profession?
Well, we put Obama on the front page because, firstly, he's a candidate in next week's presidential election. He's very likely to win, from what we understand from the polls, but also as a potential next president, he has possibly a massive influence on some key decisions that will affect the profession.
So what are those decisions? Well, obviously we've heard a lot, I suppose, in the past about his views on tax havens. He's been a big critic. Actually, he's probably more in line with the consensus now. But in other areas, how will he have an impact?
Well, I think there are three critical areas for accountants here. One is, what will the US do with fair value accounting? There's been an enormous volume of criticism throughout the credit crunch. The SEC, the US financial watchdog, is undertaking a review of fair value along with FASB, the accounting standards editor over there. So there's a decision to make at some point in the future, under the next president, about what to do with that. The second issue is going to be what to do with convergence. This is the project to bring US accounting standards in line with international financial reporting standards. At the moment, we're on track for the US to adopt IFRS, but Obama sounds slightly protectionist in some of his statements, and there's not entirely a great deal of enthusiasm broadly for IFRS over there at the moment, because it does, of course, embody fair value accounting. Third issue, and last one, which I think is critical, is an auditor liability cap. Some weeks ago, we know the Treasury concluded a review of the audit market in the US, but they did nothing about capping auditor liabilities, and so they've done nothing to protect auditors and nothing in that area to encourage more players into the big audit market.
So what do we know about Obama? I mean, obviously, sort of with a lot of these people, they don't tend to win elections by telling people what their view on auditor liability is. I mean, it's not a core issue on the stump, really. But I mean, what do we know about him, and what can we tell from that?
Well, what we do know about him critically is who he's being advised by. And one of his key advisors at the moment is Paul Volcker, a former chairman of the Federal Reserve during the 70s, which headed off massive amounts of inflation over there with high interest rates. He's also a former chairman of the IASC, the parent body for the International Accounting Standards Board. Volcker is an internationalist. He likes international accounting standards. I think we can be fairly sure that Volcker will say to Obama, this is a good thing to do, press on with convergence. That may be an argument he has to have, because he may have to overcome what are Obama's instinctive feel for a protectionist attitude. What's more in doubt is what Volcker would say about fair value. In recent speeches, Volcker has been a little bit sceptical about its efficacy and whether it needs to be supported. He's mainly come out in favour of reviewing it very carefully.
I suppose what's also interesting about Volcker is that he was involved with the Iraq oil inquiry, and also, I suppose, with the comments on tax havens, one might expect that Obama is quite critical of white-collar crime and wrongdoing. So, I mean, is that something that maybe we should be looking at?
I suspect that's something that will come up on the horizon. Of course, Volcker took an enormous amount of criticism for his examination of the Oil for Food programme back then. But if you take a very close look at Obama's positioning, he's been very much a blue-collar kind of presidential candidate. So I imagine that kind of white-collar crime will be high on his agenda, which is potentially the reason why a cap for auditor liability in the US would prove very unattractive, because right now in the current political environment, who would introduce a piece of legislation that would offer auditors much more protection than they previously had? We may feel it's justified. After all, we could argue that Big Four audit firms underwrite the world's capital markets.
Yeah.
But right now, that'd be a very politically sensitive thing to do.
I mean, that is an interesting issue. I mean, that auditor liability issue in the US seems to be going nowhere, and as a result is causing problems around the world, because the UK, a lot of UK companies won't go ahead because they're not sure that it will be satisfactory for their American listings and their American investors. Is that just being held over because of the election, the change in this political cycle, or do you get the sense that sort of Obama will not be keen on that as well?
Well, I think that's quite right. I think it's on ice at the moment because of the election cycle. We do know that Hank Paulson, the current chairman of the Secretary for the Treasury in the US, ordered the review of the audit market in the US under Arthur Levitt, former SEC chairman. Arthur Levitt delivered his conclusions. There were a number of recommendations there, but he said nothing about auditor liability capping, and we know he didn't because Arthur Levitt is not very sympathetic to that view. But that report is on ice. Paulson made no active response to that report. It's gone away. I mean, the simple reason for that is that Paulson is massively distracted by rescuing the economy right now. So we can assume that once the presidential regime changes, there may be the appointment of some key figures, a replacement of Paulson even new head of the SEC. Then I think that might come back. But it will come back, I think, at the instigation of the auditors themselves, who will have to lobby hard, I suspect, in Washington to demonstrate that that issue needs to be put back on the agenda.
Another chance for them to make the case, I guess.
I think that's quite right. And I think that's useful, of course, because that report was put on ice. Nothing was said about auditor liability caps. So there is now a second chance to get that on a presidential agenda.
OK, thanks for that, Gavin. Do look out for that special issue of Accountancy Age today. We've got several pages of news all about Barack Obama. And join us next week.